Hello, hello. Hi everyone, welcome. Welcome to the first talk at EAGxUtrecht. And I have the task of introducing our illustrious speaker. So, Robert Jones. Robert brings more than 2 decades of communications, government affairs, campaigns, and public policy experience to the table. From fighting for science-based fisheries management to supporting innovative alternative protein startups, advising the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and being a James Beard Foundation trained chef advocate. So he's treaded a lot of different careers. And Robert is the most passionate about reforming our global food system. And at the moment, he is the VP of the Global Public Affairs at Mosa Meat, which is our alternative protein startup, which is located in the Netherlands. No, I'll hand it over to him. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. And I'm a huge fan of the EA movement, so it's really an honor to be here. Find a place where I'm not blocking the screen too much here. So I appreciate the introduction to maybe add a little more texture leading up to the journey I'm going to tell you about. I'm not Dutch, you can hear that. I'm American, Texan more specifically. You'll find it ironic, I come from a cattle ranching family in Texas, and we're going to talk a lot about the role that cattle play and a challenge that we have in the food system and some alternatives that we're working on. But I worked in politics in the United States for 20 years, working on various issues and been working at the intersection of food production and climate for the last 10 years, and had the great opportunity to move to the Netherlands 4 years ago to work for this innovative company working on a really innovative product. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to what we do and the science behind it, but I'm not here to be an evangelist for our product today. More generally, I want to talk about a challenge that we face in the food system and a broad strategy that many of us that are in the space are pursuing in order to address some of the wicked challenges that we humans have created for ourselves. So jumping right in, this might look familiar to some of you. In 2009, the Stockholm Resilience Center really added a really thoughtful framework for us to think about in order to understand what is the pressure that we're putting on the planet right now, and how do we measure that? How do we understand the trajectory that we're on? And more importantly, where are the tipping points? So they identified 9 planetary boundaries, and you can see them in order in each of all of the pie pieces. And there's some fancy words like biogeochemical flow, that's basically nitrogen and phosphorus, which is largely coming from agriculture. Biosphere integrity, which is basically biodiversity divided in 2 buckets, and we'll talk about. And you can see there's some places where it doesn't look bad, right? Stratospheric ozone depletion, atmospheric aerosol loading, ocean acidification, which is on the verge of being bad. That'll be orange and red very soon. But there's actually a success story to be told in those other 2 pie pieces. It shows if we really dedicate ourselves and we have a global movement, there is a way to crawl back from some of the challenges that we've created. Now, unfortunately, in the 9 planetary boundaries that we have identified, the food and agriculture system is responsible for pushing us over the loading capacity of the Earth in 5 of the 9. And you can see them basically starting with climate change, biodiversity, land system change, fresh water, and biochemical flows. Food and agriculture production is predominantly pushing us over those edges. In fact, we know now, because of the role that the food and agriculture system plays in the climate change process and in hot spots and emissions around the globe, there is no pathway to the Paris Climate Accord goal of 1.5 or even 2 degrees unless you deal with the role that food and agriculture plays in this crisis. Let's call it. That's what it is. It's a crisis. But it's not just greenhouse gases. It's not just climate change. There's interrelated activities going on that are being caused by the way we make food right now. So I wanted to sort of lay that out just as a framework to think about first. Digging in specifically into what is it about the food system that is contributing to these challenges, and especially through, and now again, back through the greenhouse gas lens. Well, there's a sticky challenge with a type of animal called a ruminant. I see some of you nodding your head. You know what that means. A ruminant is that magical creature, a cow, a sheep, a lamb that has 4 stomachs, strangely, and they're able to use those 4 stomachs to turn grass and other shrubs that are basically inedible or have no protein for a normal animal, but because of this really complex digestive system that they have, they're able to pull nutrients out and eat things that other animals can't. But there's a byproduct from that that's really a problem, and that is the process of methagenesis in that 4th stomach, where in order to convert those nutrients, they are creating a byproduct of methane, CH4, for those of you that are chemically inclined. Methane is a serious challenge in this dynamic. It's 86 times more potent than CO2. It is incredibly effective at trapping water vapor in the upper atmosphere, immediately contributing to the greenhouse gas effect. But there's good news about methane as well, is that it's also very short-lived. Unlike CO2, which can hang out in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, the half-life of methane is 10 to 12 years. So if you can start to reduce methane production today, by the end of the decade, you can actually see the results from that and begin to see a stabilization of the increase in temperatures. And if you can maintain that reduction in methane in the long term, you can even create a cooling effect. So positive news. I like to stay positive. This is a daunting challenge, but there are bright spots. But you have to deal with the role that these animals play, ranging from beef for meat, beef for dairy, lamb and mutton, not as big in Europe, but obviously huge parts of the world where that is the primary animal protein that is being eaten. So you have to address these challenges. There's probably some surprises on this chart too, right? How many of you are feeling guilty about that chocolate bar right now? Yeah. So there all these complex dynamics, like what are you deforesting in order to grow something else that is not natural, that is not as much of a carbon sequestration? What are the impacts of that supply chain? Food is complex, right? We think about climate change and we think about energy. It's pretty easy, right? We know fossil fuels are a problem. You got to replace them with something else. It's all sort of aggregated. The food value chain is very disaggregated, and it's very complex, and it's also very emotional, right? It's like food is emotion. In fact, at age 42, I took a 12-month sabbatical and I went to culinary school. One, I needed a break and I had some bad professional burnout. But 2, I wanted to immerse myself in food and really understand these emotions and understand the way food culture plays into the decisions that people make about their consumer habits. Because people will easily understand that driving a petrol car is a problem, and they probably should get a hybrid or an EV or a bike or move to a place with trains. But the decisions every day about going to the grocery store and what they buy seem to be much more disconnected and harder to communicate. So you can see there's a variety of things that are a challenge on here. Coming back to methane, just as a factoid, the second largest production of methane in the food and value chain is actually rice. And all of this challenge right here is actually methane. It's an interesting process that happens here, because when you husk the rice and you get the kernel out, they oftentimes leave those husks in the field. And then they flood those fields in order to control weeds and pests. And the husk from last season sit there and ferment and basically create, an undrinkable beer, but it's seeping methane into the atmosphere in massive quantities. Think about how many rice fields there are in the world. So there's these sticky little challenges everywhere that need to be dealt with. And on top of that, there's the complexities of a Western mindset, right? A global North versus a global South. And there's a lot of people who want to push sort of an ethic and say, we need to eat less meat. That's a very Western concept. And it's true. We overconsume meat in massive quantities. But animal protein plays a critical part of nutrition in major parts of the developing world and the global South. And just to say that in a blanket statement has a little bit of insensitivity to it and is not taken very well. But I wanted to give you a sense of where these challenges come, and obviously you can see, again, coming back to meat, and especially red meat, where we have real serious challenges in the food value chain. To put a finer point on it, I wanted to pull out some statistics for you to think about. First of all, about 14% of all greenhouse gas emissions are coming from livestock. We talked about where most of that is coming from, but think about globally, 14%, what a large percentage that is coming just from animals for humans to eat. It's a really serious challenge. And out of all the agricultural productivity, all of the land that is available out there to use, and some of it is not good for crops, it's more suited for grazing for animals, but 80% of the agricultural land that we're using in the world is being used for livestock. Massive consumer of water. A lot of people don't realize that we also have another challenge. 80% of all the antibiotics that are produced on planet Earth are given to animals to keep them healthy so we can eat them. Just think about that for a second. And of course, that's not where it ends, because you have those antibiotics that then come into our systems, and we have serious challenges now with antimicrobial resistance, and we've got to figure that out. But this is a really large challenge. And the global meat market is worth about $1 trillion and expected to be about 1.8 trillion in the next 25 years. And this is where I get to my next slide, is that you might be in a bubble and think, oh, I see more vegan restaurants than I've ever seen. I see options, in a Western context, and think meat consumption is going down. That's true in some places. The Netherlands is sort of stabilized. Germany's going down, which is a little surprising. Italy's actually the lowest in Europe. But in the broader context, meat consumption is skyrocketing. And the FAO estimates that meat consumption will increase by as much as 50% in the next 30 years. Most of that is driven by a rising middle class in large countries like India and China, where it's a status symbol, and they want the Western diet that we had, and they're eating more meat every day. Cultures that were eating 80% plant-based now moving more to like 50-50, and so it's contributing to this challenge. And I call that sort of that growth that we're looking at, which is what I'm really focused on in a protein diversification strategy, is both an economic opportunity and sort of planetary doom, right? Is we have to deal with today to 2050 and layer in alternatives, because you can't simply just keep scaling up animal agriculture as it exists today and meet that demand without destroying the planet. So to give you a quick primer, my founders, two Dutch researchers, because of a Dutch grant in 2004 that was spread out several universities, but largely centered at Maastricht, they made a breakthrough on using human tissue engineering, medical tissue engineering, and they produced the first cultivated burger, and they showed it to the world in 2013. And another little factoid, the government money actually ran out before they finished, but they published some papers, and of all the strange things in the world, one of the people to read the papers was Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google. And he just called up Mark Post one day and was like, "Hi, I'm Sergey Brin." And he was like, "I don't know who you are." And he goes, "Oh, I founded a company, it's called Google." And Mark goes, "Oh, I've heard of that." And he said, "Can you do this or not? You need a proof of concept or no one's ever going to take it serious. How much would it cost to grow 3 burgers?" And they did some back of the napkin math, and he said about $1 million US. Sergey Brin said, "No problem. You got 9 months. My people will call your people," hung up. They did it. And then he put in another 250,000 for a big public relations event on stage in London, showed the world, and it kicked off a space race. And now there's 150 companies around the world making some sort of cultivated animal protein. All of that original research was open access, so it wasn't protected by IP, which I think is a very good thing. So just real quickly on the process. We start with a sample of cells from an animal. We're working with farmers both in the Eindhoven area and Maastricht. You apply a little anesthesia, a little incision. You take about a fingertip size, black peppercorn size sample of tissue. Animal gets 2 or 3 stitches. You can't even tell the incision was there 3 weeks later. We take that, we isolate it down to the most healthy, what are called satellite cells, adult stem cells. We put them in a nice warm, cozy environment that's the temperature of the animal, and it's full of lots of nutrients like minerals, vitamins, glucose, growth factors isolated from plants, and it tricks them to do what they would have done in the animal. They may multiply by orders of magnitude. And then we put them in another solution and trick them into becoming muscle tissue and fat tissue, which we grow separately, and we recombine to have the meatball or the burger, the bolognese, empanada, whatever your flavor is. And it's cultivated meat. It's meat. It's beef. It's not remarkable because it's just beef, but it's remarkable because it's made in a very different way. And we can do this, which is particularly important in Europe. We don't need to use GMO. As you probably know, that's quite a no-go in Europe in terms of bringing a product to market. We've gotten away from using what was called fetal bovine serum, which is used in a lot of research and development of cell culturing, and we don't need any antibiotics or very little antibiotics, which is, again, a departure from conventional meat production. So my point here is that we are focused on Europe while many other companies are focused on the US and Singapore, where there's a little bit better environment. The regulatory structure here is quite hard. Is that 5 minutes remaining? Yeah, okay. But we're focused here because there's no path to global impact without Europe. We're second largest market in the world, 400 million people. But we have some pretty serious challenges on our hand. You probably have noticed there's been some elections recently. They've been with mixed success, depending on what your persuasion is in the world. But for us, they're a real challenge. And we're seeing the most polarized environment that we've ever seen. All of a sudden, this is a fight about somehow that we are trying to put farmers out of business. Not true. And also a fight between vegans and vegetarians versus our products, saying, you know, we really should be getting people away from animals at all. Why can't we just eat beans? I get all of these perspectives, but we're focused on the people that I consider in the middle, who are hard-coded meat eaters, and you're not going to get them to change their behavior unless you give them a really lazy way to do that. And we don't have a lot of time for behavior change without, you know, really moving people forward. So we're facing a pretty tough environment. Out of that polarization is coming a very organized right-wing effort to basically tear down the idea of having alternative proteins at all. We're seeing some really strange stuff. Yes, that is an actual devil, Satan, associated with Bill Gates. And somehow we've been pulled into the World Economic Forum and Bill Gates and 5G, and I mean, it's like nutso. But unfortunately, that also results in real political barriers. This is President von der Leyen at a State of the Union address last year, beginning to back away from the European Green Deal and the farm-to-fork strategy and giving up on some of the core sustainability public policy that we were hoping would pass to give our technology cover. Italy has banned our products during the campaign, trying to save himself at the end. Rishi Sunak basically said, we will not ban meat in the UK, even though nobody was proposing you ban meat in the UK. I was really desperate. So what I would argue here at the end in the closing slides is what we're thinking about how to be effective in what we're doing is really having a reset and reframe of how we talk about these things, because we feel like we did contribute to this polarized frame and talking about the potential of our technology, which could easily be misinterpreted. And what we need to really be careful with is that this is a systems challenge. This is a serious systems level problem. And there are no silver bullets that are going to solve this. Cultivated meat alone is not going to solve it. Regenerative agriculture is not going to solve it. Plant-based products, it's a confluence of all of these tools in the toolbox that get you to a place where you might have a chance of meeting 2 degrees in the Paris Climate Accord and avoiding some of the very worst scenarios that we're facing. So one thing is certain, and we are talking about more and more, is that farmers have to be at the center of this successful transition, right? It has to be a just transition, and showing them how can they be part of this protein transition effort? How can they grow different crops? How can they make cultivated meat in small scale at their farm? Some of the farmers are going to look like this farmer at a neighboring ranch in Texas to my family ranch. Some of them are going to look like my colleague, Laura Jackish, who runs our fat team and is making cultivated fat. Both farmers, but using the new ways and the old ways. And that's the way we look at this, is that the future is going to have to be a mix of these things together. It might be a bioreactor. It might be a cow with methane-reducing feed additives. It might be plant-based products. But at the end of the day, we need farmers to grow the nutrients that we're going to feed ourselves in order to make the meat. And this is a circular process. And we want people to think more about this mix of protein. Yes, Westerners, reduce your meat consumption. We're not proposing that you eat more red meat, but if you're going to, make sure it's less and better meat. Eat more plant-based, eat more legumes, and get a planetary health balance in your diet every day. I'm going to skip forward. So, final thoughts here. The way I look at this and the way we're beginning to frame this new effort that we have is that this should be about and, not or. And certainly not shaming people and not shaming consumers for their choices, but providing them with better alternatives and a sensory experience that meets their price quota, meets taste, and it meets the cultural relevance of what they want to buy at the store. I'm also not a fan of the alternative protein, because it's automatically, the framing means either this or that. And we see ourselves as a complement to the food system. Systems over silver bullets, recentering farmers, and getting out of this idea of this false dichotomy that, we have to stop doing this today and start doing that, because that's not the way this transition is going to work. We're talking about moving a protein transition that will take decades to do, but we have to start it now. And as long as we have that polarized rhetoric and we're part of the problem, we will have those political barriers that prevent us from ever getting to market in the first place. And then finally, we always have to remind ourselves, even though we got a lot of bioreactors and labby stuff around us, and some of our folks are wearing white lab coats, at the end of the day, we're a food company. We're making delicious burgers and meatballs and bolognese and empanadas, and we need to talk about our products more like food and a little less like science fiction. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for a nice talk. It was very engaging, and indeed, you acknowledge that the message that we have to be inclusive and think of it as a global food system that we have to change, and not just meat eating as one aspect. Yeah, and then shaming people, consumers for that. Okay. Yeah, now I would open up the session for questions. I would suggest to use the Swapcard app where you can put in the questions, or I can come to you and you can speak your question into the mic.
I think he was first in the back there.
The back? Yep.
Hey, thank you for the great talk. Scaling this up requires a focus on cost. So what are the costs you're looking at nowadays and over the next few years? And what's the path forward in this regard?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the number one barrier for cultivated meat is moving from what was human medicine, tissue engineering, to food and feed grade manufacturing. So all of the original components at the R&D level were pharmaceutical grade nutrients for the cells. And so we've spent years now identifying analogs to those pharmaceutical grade components that are food grade. And with that, that's where the cost, 80% of cultivated meat is in the growth media. It's in that liquid nutrient broth. So it's about getting every one of those ingredients down. I think we're probably doing better in the world than most companies because we're really collaborative. Again, we spun out of a university project and a collaborative research project. The most successful thing we've done so far to get this right is a partnership with a company called Nutrico. Nutrico is one of the largest animal feed companies in the world, and they're a European company. And we're experimenting using waste side streams from their animal feed operation to go into the what's called the basal media, the growth media. And we've been able to reduce the cost of the media by orders of magnitude and replace 96% of the components in the growth media with food grade components. So, the original burger in 2013 cost that each patty, was about $300,000. We can make burgers today, for 100 euros. That's still not good enough, but we're close. And that some of the remaining challenges are just economies of scale when you start actually manufacturing, because we don't have regulatory approvals yet. So we're producing at very small scale still, just to send those off for analysis for regulators to look at allergens and toxicity. But we have built a pilot production facility. When we turn the machines on and start producing for our first approval, which will be later this year in Singapore, we expect those costs to go down. But no doubt for the first 5 years, our products are going to be more expensive than conventional beef. We know that, but we do think that we can reach price parity in 5 to 7 years, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is more efficient than an animal. A cow is actually a fairly inefficient animal. You get about 1 calorie of meat for every 13 calories you feed it. So our food to feed ratio is going to be way higher, because we're not growing skin and bones and teeth and organs. We're just growing the edible part. And so that feed ratio, we think in the 20-year horizon, we'll be able to get the cost of our beef even below conventional meat. And then the value proposition really changes in terms of consumer adoption.
Yeah. I had literally the same question.
Okay.
But thank you.
So you just said that there's no pathway to global impact without Europe, and I was just thinking that at least there's Asia where they're not thinking of banning it, but I wonder how confident are you that we will be able to consume cultivated meat in Europe in the future?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, we're in the fight. We're in an existential fight right now at the political level. Just today, Hungary also filed legislation to ban our products. But it's an EU decision. It's the European Commission through the novel foods law in Europe. So right now it's protected, and Italy's effort and Hungary's effort is a derogation of the single market, and we think we'll beat those challenges in court. But it's the sentiment behind it that's scary, right? It's like, trying to reverse this course of this direction where some people feel like they need to preemptively ban our products. I still have a high degree of confidence that we're going to be okay. But what will happen if they make it too onerous, or if they pause authorizations in the novel foods law, you will see a massive exodus of companies, and they'll go to Singapore and they'll go to the US, where they have been more supportive of generally of biotech and biomanufacturing. So, but that's what we want to avoid, right? And not just because we're a Dutch company, but because, again, we don't see a path to really impacting the global food system without being able to get to market here as well. So that's what I spend most of my time on, is de-risking the politics around member states.
Thanks.
Hi. So I wanted to ask, I think you mentioned that you're not really targeting Singapore, but and majority of the other companies in this space is targeting the US and Singapore. So I just wanted to know, is your technology that you're proposing much different from what's already existing and in production in market in Singapore, for example? Yeah.
Yeah, well, just to be clear, we are targeting Singapore. Okay. We already submitted a dossier there. We're waiting on approval, and we have a we have a relationship set up with a contract manufacturer there. We're ready for them to manufacture our product and do the tech transfer to them as soon as the Singapore Food Agency gives us the approval. But Singapore, in many ways, is ceremonial, right? I mean, it's 5 million consumers, of which you only have partial market share. But it's a milestone for investors. It's a signal for rest of Asia. There are reasons to do it, but in terms of global impact, Singapore is not where the game really is. So that's why we're still focused on the U.S., still focused on Europe. I'm doing a lot of work in the UAE right now, working with religious leaders to get our product declared halal, and then using that halal certification for Indonesia, for Indonesia, Malaysia, where there's these huge Muslim populations. There's still things to work through to get that done. But I hope that answers your question. Technology.
Technology.
So fundamentally, no difference. But I don't want to rag on other companies. What I'll say is the products that have been approved around the world so far are chicken. Avian cells are relatively easy to work with. Bovine cells are not. And there's recombinant sequence growth factors for all types of poultry. There is not for beef. And so we've had to do a lot of that heavy lifting to do that R&D ourselves. But we're laser focused on beef for climate reasons. It's the hard nut to crack. So in some ways our technology is different because this is what we're focused on. We could have come to market with a chicken product or a fish product years ago. So.
Any more questions?
I'm loving this cup, by the way. I filled it up with water and a great gift.
Thank you for the talk. My question was on, you mentioned that the ratio is 1 to 13 for beef right now. Do you know what ratio you're targeting? Because another issue that we haven't mentioned so far is food competition when it comes to hunger worldwide. And so far what we feed to many animals, even though some could eat more, is grain that also humans could eat.
Yeah.
Do you know numbers?
What we're targeting? I mean, I don't think we've set...
What's realistic?
I think what's realistic is we hope to have something in the 70 percentile in terms of, food feed ratio. Whether that's possible yet, I don't know. But that's where we're targeting, because it's where, costs with the cost curve plus getting the growth media costs down, you really start to see the margins that you need for a successful business. I think there'll be some technological developments in some of the growth factors that we use as well, which are quite expensive to make. And we see some developments coming down the pipeline, and that'll help, like I said, by orders of magnitude of getting the cost of the growth media down. In terms of feed competition, it's a very good point, right? I mean, part of the reason in the land use change that ruminants are playing such a role in greenhouse gases is because we're tearing down things like the Amazon in order to grow soy to feed animals. So in terms of the nutrients that we've been experimenting with, we've been trying to get away from the major commodity crops and stay away from soy, if at all possible, for example, and look at more indigenous crops to Europe that we've gotten away from as part of monocropping, and that's part of the experimentation that's going on with Nutreco as well, because they have the supply chain and the value chain where they can sort of absorb the cost of those sorts of experiments and drive enough value for farmers to plant an extra field, of something that they don't normally do. We don't have that yet. We don't have that sort of buying power yet. So it's why that we have, having a partner like Nutreco is really important. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you already mentioned this, but so you're saying that some countries are not allowing you to sell your product. So I'm just wondering, what are the reasons they give, and what do you think the actual reasons are, if those are different?
Yeah, that's a good one. So the Italy is the country that is explicitly, legislation has passed, it's signed, it's in law, even though it's a violation of EU law, and they know that. so the reasons that they gave are all over the map. But at the end of the day, it was driven by a farmers organization in Italy called Coldiretti. And for them, it's supposedly protecting the food culture, the food traditions of Italy. But they're also opposed to things like alcohol-free wine and, you know, it's like basically if it's not a production method that was used 50 to 100 years ago, it's not acceptable. It's natural. But strangely, they've also now just come out in favor of new genomic techniques for crops. So they're a little bit all over the map. So what I think this is really about is fear of competition with European livestock producers. And I get that, but we're going to be such a small-scale industry to start with, and as we ramp up, our primary targets are going to be exports, and that's why we sign, and not even making here as much as getting the R&D done here, and then building facilities around the world where we have approvals, so that we're not flying meat around the world and negating our sustainability gains. That's why we already have the contract manufacturer in Singapore ready to go, because we don't want to be flying it all the way to Singapore. So Hungary today, I mean, I just came from the embassy in Hungary. I was basically ambushed. They were like, come have a constructive dialogue. And then they announced in the middle of it that they had just banned our products. And it was about protecting rural way of, these are the things they said, protecting rural way of life, safety concerns with our product, sustainability and environmental concerns. And I get it. I mean, we're basically electrifying meat production. We're centralizing energy usage. And if you're making chicken or duck, it's a less value proposition. If you're using dirty power, right? If you're using, non-renewable energy, the sustainability value proposition is lower. Even if you're using dirty power to make beef the way we make it, you still have a big upside, especially because of the methane. Mosa Meat's 100% renewable power, by the way. So these are the claims that they made. I don't believe that they legitimately, this is what it's about. Much of what we've seen, especially leading into the election in Italy with Meloni, was political theater. This was like, you see the farmers protest around Europe, and many of these farmers have very good reasons to be protesting. The value chain is super unfair to them. It's squeezing them. They're not getting a fair wage for their work. But then you saw these sort of right-wing chaos climbers come around and start trying to tack on these issues to these other legitimate economic issues and insert us into a debate that we're not really, shouldn't have any part of. So.
Thank you.
I have a question about how you see the future, because you say that you need both, like the regenerative agriculture and this kind of system, but how can they merge in the future? Like, do you think this kind of technology can become available for farmers so they can do it on a community level, or bring it to the rural
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. So I think everybody recognizes animal agriculture is going to play a role in the future, for the foreseeable future. I mean, it's going to have a role around the world. But if you're going to raise livestock, you need to do it in the most sustainable way. And agroecology, there's sort of this agroecological movement. Regenerative agriculture is a term I'm a little uncomfortable with, because I also see major corporations using it for greenwashing. But generally, agroecology are real practices. There's defined practices for that. The challenges with getting towards a truly agroecological practice or business operation is that you need more land and your yields go down. That's where I think we're the perfect complement to more regenerative agriculture across Europe and around the world, because we can have an intensive protein production system with a fraction of the land and help meet that future demand. And farmers who are still raising animals can raise premium cuts and get more for their animals, and not be providing just commodity meat to the market where they're not getting fair prices, or they may be even selling at a loss and depending on subsidies only. So we see these two these two systems playing well together. The other big advantage to our technology is that you can basically make meat anywhere, even if it's not suitable for animals. In fact, there's been cells grown on the International Space Station, and NASA started a lot of this original research thinking about long-term space travel. But you could have meat production or fish production. You could be growing bluefin tuna in the middle of the Sahara Desert if you want. So, it kind of turns things on its head, and we think about where is agricultural productivity going to get better and get worse because of climate change? And how do we adjust and fit into this new patchwork of weather changes? And then how does that fit with more agroecological practices? And we don't have all the answers yet, but this is why we're trying to bridge the divide and have these conversations with people who are truly focused on agroecology, and it's not about theater or greenwashing.
I'll sneak in a question.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if you can highlight any lobbying successes, because right now the political climate, like you said, is detrimental, but I presume there have also been some successes that we can... we can see.
I'm still standing. It's one. I'm sort of joking, but no. I mean, we have definitely. There's been a lot of efforts to suppress our introduction into the market through various ways. Italy is the most extreme, but we're already having success there. In filing a legal challenge. I can't talk a lot about that yet, but I fully expect that the Italian law is going to be overturned. A bill passed in the Romanian Senate last year to ban our products, and it was totally election theater. Right, it was a few weeks before the election. We were able to go in and educate, and I've got Romanian speakers at Mosa Meat. We basically put together a task force and a team, and we've kept that bill from passing the Chamber of Deputies, and it's effectively dead now. We have a great relationship with the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, and we were part of a consortia that put in a proposal in 2022, and the Dutch government awarded us 60 million euro, not to Mosa Meat, but to the consortia, to build a cellular agriculture ecosystem in the Netherlands. So there's now PhD and master's programs starting at TU Delft, at Maastricht, and Wageningen, and we're building the first open access pilot scale-up facility for other startups. We're past this phase, but for other startups to incentivize them to move to the Netherlands and do their first batches of meat or fish for their novel foods approval, and not have that huge capex of building a giant facility, and allow them to get into the game with a lower bar. Huge success, and the Netherlands has also played a critical role at the permanent representative level in Brussels. They're helping organize other countries like Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Estonia, Lithuania, Portugal, Spain, to kind of form a frontrunners group more forward thinking about alternative protein, to be a counterbalance to what we're seeing in Hungary and Poland and Romania and Italy. So there's kind of this behind the scenes battle going on. But we're hanging in there, and I think that's a success. So.
Do you think the relationship with the Dutch ministry will stay the same now?
I knew you were going to ask. I knew you were going to ask. So I don't have a relationship with the new minister, obviously. She's brand new. Let her find the bathrooms and get settled, and then I'll be knocking on her door. But I do think that the National Protein Strategy in the Netherlands and the National Growth Fund, which is the 60 million euro, all of those things are moving down the pathway already, and there's nothing in the new coalition agreement that changes course on that. Do I think that will be as aggressive on some of the things that I wish they would be? Probably not. But I think generally the protein transition conversation continues to move forward, and I don't yet see that they're going to do damage to that. So.
Thank you for a very good talk. I think you're on a very important mission, and I think a lot of people in the EA community agree to that. I was wondering, what do you think people in the EA community can do to support this mission?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first, obviously, is more at a personal level, being thoughtful about your diet and your decisions and your food choices. And then again, approaching other people and educating them about, changing your diet is the number one thing you can do to impact the planet. but doing it in a thoughtful and non-shaming way, because that's one of the things I see that goes sideways with a lot of people who want to have a conversation with someone about what they should or shouldn't eat. I think the second thing is that the alternative, buy these products, right? I mean, it's like, the plant-based movement in particular, they're to market before us. They're struggling right now. Some of that I think is unfair, because they got overheated during COVID and everyone was interested in trying something new. And then their sales went back down and now everyone's declared doom and gloom, right? And I think some of the best things we can do is use our purchasing decisions and our purchasing power to show that they have staying power. And then the next thing is that if you really want to get active, I can use you in lobbying efforts, right? I mean, we're a corporation, and I get limited traction when I go knock on the door at the Tweede Kamer and be like, we want X, Y, Z. But when voters start showing up to hearings, to sign-on letters, getting involved, then it really turns heads. And so anybody who wants to get involved in this effort, I'm pretty easy to find, and it's robert@mosameat.com. And we're periodically organizing trips to go do visits, and especially we now have a bunch of new members, both in the European Parliament and here in The Hague, that we need to go reintroduce ourselves to. So those would be the three off the top of my head.
I might have to say that we have 10 more minutes for the next speaker, so is it a good idea to stop at this stage? Yeah?
Well, one more, give her a chance. She, I think, was trying.
Yep.
No?
I'll be quick in my response.
Okay. I'm thinking about the transforming food systems part and how Big Corp has a huge reach. Do you see any potential for partnerships there? Or, yeah. I mean, I know there's greenwashing. I know everything that happens there because I come from that side. So,
yeah, this is another one that I think is really important to think about, because sometimes it's easy to fall into the anti-corporate rhetoric, right? It's easy to beat up on the bad guys and blame them for everything. But from our perspective, the best opportunities to find co-investors in our projects, the best opportunities for us to have an exit where we actually, our products go from R&D to mass scale, is by partnerships with Unilever and Nestle and General Mills and Tyson and Cargill. So we also try to strike that balance of saying, you could do better, but also we want to work with you. Because ultimately, our technology is going to depend heavily on the existing animal agriculture value chain. And so I think more than many companies have tried to be very careful about our rhetoric and our outreach. And I've applied for numerous Horizon Europe, React EU grants with companies to try to build those relationships. So I think it's a really important conversation. Yes, I think they have a huge role to play. And does it mean that you don't hold them accountable? Of course not. I mean, we need to force them to do better. But at the end of the day, success and failure for complementary proteins is going to depend on the existing big players. Who has the biggest plant-based research and development operation in the world? Cargill, one of the largest meat companies in the world. And in fact, I watch, he's Dutch, Marcel Smit, the Cargill Asia CEO, respond to a question at a conference in Singapore, and somebody was like, how are you going to stop these companies that are trying to put us out of business? And he went, whoa. He said, first of all, we're not a meat company, we're a protein company. And we need to be thinking about what does the protein mix of the future look like? That's the mentality we need, and we need to keep pushing them in that direction. So I think there's a carrot and stick role here for multinational food companies. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Nice.
Thanks.
It went well.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah.